Trump's coming in January. Is he just going to be bowled along by this 30-year-old US foreign policy against the seven that's been prosecuted by Democrat and Republican president alike? Will he be able to do anything but be a party to the completion of that long objective?
Well, President Trump, much like President Obama, was rather swept along by this entity we call the deep state, which I would simply refer to as a coalition of prominent lobbies, a lot of money from various lobbies, as well as a coalition of congressmen and senators who were part of the beneficiaries of the lobby, putting together this plan that you've just described. This was clearly hatched in the 90s because the theory was from the neoconservatives. And you had Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Dov Zakheim, Libby, Shulsky, there are a number of other people. They were part of this cabal that said if we can capture or control the oil fields of the Middle East, then we have China that becomes hostage to the oil, natural gas, and so forth. And at the same time, our friend Israel benefits enormously. We will make the region safe for Israel. It didn't work quite that way because they couldn't bring it off and they were distracted and they made some bad decisions. But the Central Intelligence Agency, working with MI6, Mossad, and more recently with Turkish intelligence, managed to craft this new development to rescue that strategy from the ash heap of history, give it new life, and send it into action. So you've got to look not just at what's happening in Syria, you have to look at the repercussions for Iraq, certainly for Jordan and Egypt. All of these states now are going to face some sort of internal trouble from these ISIS-like fighters that we've bankrolled and set up. And we have to bet on the Turkish advance against the Kurds. That's a matter of national security interest for them. And the Israelis are now going to try and build out this security zone all the way around the Israeli state. And they have their eye. If you go back and remember, Mr. Netanyahu held up a map and he showed it, and everybody said, well, that's shocking because it shows part of Syria, part of Jordan, part of Egypt, along with southern Lebanon, and everybody sort of dismissed it. Well, that's the sphere that we would call a security zone for Israel. Now, cannot that all be accomplished? Not immediately, but from the Israeli standpoint, the key to success is the destruction of Iran, which in their minds is the single opponent left in the region that can put up resistance because they think they can bully Saudi Arabia and the Emirates into doing whatever they want.
Does all of it, even let's supposing hypothetically Iran was hobbled eventually or defeated, does that make Israel safe?
No, I don't think so. And my argument has always been that there are really two great powers in the region, the Turks and the Persians. And if you go back over the last 1,000 years, those are the two mighty states in the region. Now, we've had the British there, the French, and others. We've meddled, but it hasn't been lasting, just as the Crusader states existed for almost 300 years, but they were gradually whittled away. So you have basically the Turkish pole of power and the Iranian pole of power. If you destroy Iran, and I don't think that that's going to happen, frankly, I think the Iranians are going to resist furiously, and they're going to be supported by Russia and more distantly China when they do, and perhaps others. But if you did destroy Iran, that would leave you with one great power in the region, and that would be Turkey. And the floodgates would open for the Sunni Islamist fighters and terrorists from all over Central Asia, as well as in the region, Africa, North Africa, would all pour in to try and build out this new Turkish caliphate. And Israel would find itself in the crosshairs because there's nothing that Mr. Erdogan would like better than to lead a procession of glorious Turkish troops down the main streets of Jerusalem.
It seems that, Israel seems almost like a shark that has to keep swimming or drown. It seems to, it's in a situation where it just has to maintain indefinitely this acquisitive behavior in the region, simply because it has no other option.
they see themselves as Fortress Israel, as permanently under threat, surrounded by people that will never accept them. Now, there have been some Israelis that departed from that attitude and have tried to forge different relationships. I think after the 73 war, the Israelis reached an agreement with Egypt that was very positive. That agreement is now effectively destroyed. And I don't know how long these puppet regimes will last. There's a huge Muslim Brotherhood movement in Egypt. We could wake up and discover that they have overthrown Sisi and that Egypt is now a Sunni Islamist state. I mean, it's not impossible. Obviously, Jordan, we all know Jordan is very dependent on British and U.S. money and influence to maintain some sort of peace. They just received $900 million from us. And that is, so to say, designed to pacify Jordan, which contains 11.2 million Palestinian Arabs. But these are weak, fragile states. The Israelis understand that. The Turks understand it. And so the land grab is on. There's no question about it. Will they overreach? Will they misjudge the situation? Will they not be successful against Iran? Will they end up in the crosshairs not only of Iran, but also the Russians? And can we Americans, from 6,000 miles away, relying almost exclusively on air and naval power, make the difference? We have yet to really challenge a nation with integrated air defenses. You know, we've just never done it, and we have depended very heavily on air power and missile power. Will that be enough? I don't know. We're going to find out. I think that's the path we're on. Israel is going to attack Iran. The Turks will attack the Kurds. And then we are going to support the Israelis. What happens in the aftermath of that, I don't know.
I wonder all the time, in what way is any of this in US interests, or indeed European or British interests? Because what this does is further destabilise or perpetuate the instability of a vast region of all sorts of people with competing internecine squabbles. And people in the millions will inevitably be displaced and will presumably in large part travel west. You know, we've got people, you know, clutching at pearls all the time in Britain and certainly in Europe about uncontrolled immigration. And yet all of this kind of activity, which only seems to benefit Israel, is surely going to just maintain that steady, difficult, complicated flow of people out of a troubled and broken part of the world.
Well, the ruling political class in the United States, in Washington, and the ruling political class in London are all universally interested in meddling in the Middle East. Now, you asked, what is our interest? Frankly speaking, we have no strategic interest at all in what happens in eastern Ukraine. We've never had any. Yet look at what we've done in the amount of money and resources we've sunk into that conflict, all for the purposes of harming Russia, which hasn't worked. Russia is stronger now and more capable than it's been since the 1980s. So what does that mean in the Middle East? We're going to meddle in behalf of or on behalf of Israel. And I wonder how that's going to affect the Saudis and the Emirates as this drama that we're discussing unfolds and the violence expands. Violence has a habit of sort of taking on a life of its own until it exhausts itself or it encounters a force it can't defeat. That's why the next critical step in all of this, frankly, is Iran. Is Iran going to withstand the onslaught of Israeli and American military power when the time comes? I don't know. I think so. And then what and how much are the Russians prepared to do? The Chinese, of course, don't want to fight anybody. The Chinese are very reasonable people. Business doesn't thrive in war. You know, your commercial interests are destroyed. So the Chinese don't want it, but the Chinese will back the Russians and they will back the Iranians with whatever they need in order to be successful. So I think it boils down to that particular development. You'll have to explain to me why British ruling elites, after all these years with their imperial past, absolutely want to be involved in any of it. It makes no sense to me. I think the best thing that the British could do is get out completely and focus elsewhere. I feel the same way about ourselves. But for some reason, we have caught this imperialist bug. Everyone in Washington is affected by it. And I think it's a case of sort of runaway national narcissism. Now, let's separate Washington from the American people, Neil. The average American doesn't know what's going on. The average American's not looking at it. You know, it reminds me of, Britain's experience with Zulus. In 1879, when you had this Islandwana disaster and 1,100 British soldiers were killed, everyone in Britain was suddenly shocked. How could this happen? Disraeli lost his position in Parliament. He was thrown out of office. A new majority took over. You could see something like that happen depending upon what how big the disaster is for us. That's eminently possible. And of course, we haven't even discussed our fiscal emergency at home, the problems we have with finance and debt to GDP ratios and productivity and other things, along with our borders and uncontrolled immigration. So it's strange that we would want to be so completely diverted by this at a point in time when rationality dictates our focus should be here at home.
And what about the timing? This is happening in the lame duck or the end game of the Biden administration. And I've always understood it, and I've had it explained to me that in that transitional period, the president's not really supposed to be doing very much of anything except caretaking. And yet, for the push for the fall of Syria and the US funding of ISIS 2.0 and all of the rest of it to come just as Biden's administration is on its way out of the door seems mendacious, to put it mildly.
Well, it's an attempt to present President Trump with a fait accompli. And that's why I think Iran will be attacked. In other words, the war is started before President Trump comes to office. He's stuck with it and has to fight it to some sort of conclusion. Now, keep in mind that President Trump's selectee for national security advisor is a man named Waltz. And he had a private meeting with the national security advisor named Sullivan for Mr. Biden. And after the meeting, he said publicly there was no daylight between what Mr. Sullivan was going to do or still doing in the Biden administration and what he would do. In other words, they see a seamless transition. So the neoconservative influence over Trump must be very profound for a man picked as his national security advisor to say that.
I'm sort of minded of the Churchill quote, one of many, the thing about this being not the end, not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning. You know, there's a sense, I think, that the propagandist media is trying to portray of what's happened in Syria being an ending, even a happy ending. But I think it's absolutely compelling to see it as starting something else infinitely more complicated and dangerous than all of the hellscape that's already unfolded.
Your characterization is accurate. It is the end of the beginning. And now we're going to see conflicts drag on in that region for years, assuming we do not escalate to the nuclear level. And that's the other issue that needs to be borne in mind. We know that the Iranians are now enriching uranium to bomb quality, 90% plus purity, or plutonium. And if I were an Iranian right now, put myself in their place, look at the region, see the Israelis on one hand, the Turks on the other, and the United States and its armed forces behind the Israelis, I think I would be working feverishly to build nuclear warheads. In fact, many people concluded after the first Gulf War that if you did not want to be invaded and suppressed by the United States, that you'd better get some nuclear weapons, because otherwise you couldn't deter us. I'm not sure that was true in 1991, but it certainly is true now. And if you look at the track record, everybody that fell under our influence or power, such as Libya, Iraq, Syria, these places are permanent basket cases. They never recover. And of course, again, we, like the British, are historically primarily a maritime power and an aerospace power. When things don't go our way, things go awry, we have a habit of simply leaving. Now, we'll see what Mr. Trump does, but I think it's important to understand his national security advisor is saying that he is aligned right now with what the Biden administration is doing. Therefore, we should not expect much change. Now, Mr. Trump wants to end the war in Russia. The problem is that's not up to him. The Russians are in firm control. They are going to end the war on the terms that they want, and the Europeans are going to have to meet with the Russians. We don't have that much influence anymore.
Yeah, my final question would be then that if Russia's will be sore after what has happened in Syria, even back-footed, will that then necessitate their hastening an end in Ukraine, the better to maintain or improve its bargaining position on the wider geopolitical stage, you know, when Trump comes in and that administration seeks to follow through on some, you know, bringing negotiations to bear in that part of the world? Will Russia do something now harder or faster than it might have otherwise in order to, you know, regain some of the balance of before?
Well, I think that's begun, Neil. We've seen that with the Oreshnik missiles that have been employed, and they have a vast stock of these hypersonic missiles. Each one has multiple independently targeted weapons aboard, so that you shoot one missile and it has effectively the equivalent of 36 warheads, and the explosive power is roughly the same as a tactical nuclear weapon, although it's conventional. So these are quite devastating. I think the Russians have lost their patience with us. We too have lied to them. We saw that during the Minsk agreements. And President Putin has pointed out in the past that while he likes President Trump, respects him, truthfully, what happened under President Trump vis-a-vis Russia when President Trump was there? Nothing good. In fact, the sanctions grew worse. And there was no reason to expect any positive change. And I think that's his position now. There's no reason for the Russians at this point, or the Chinese, to expect a dramatic departure from the trajectory we are on right now. And that's bad news, I think, because that tells these potential opponents they have to hold together, and they have to ally themselves, and they have to work against us collectively. And I think it's also the word to the BRICS. I think all the members of BRICS are effectively they're not being dragged into anything by Russia or China, but they're beginning to see that it's in their interest to survive with them against us. Since we are seen as the menace, we are meddling, we're the provocateur, not Russia, not China, not Iran.
It's a febrile painting that you offer, Colonel. But as always, after a conversation with you, after listening to it, I always feel better informed and more knowledgeable, if not wiser. You've been generous with your time. I'll hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you, Colonel Douglas Macgregor.
Well, God bless you and have a good Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too, sir.